I feel the need to say this, but happy full moon in Sagittarius. Um, I should probably say this to the end, but I am a Sag. And the sun is in Gemini. My dad was a Gemini. So I just feel like tonight is a dad daughter dance for us. And this is Measure a Year. I was out at dinner when Kyla texted me that Purdue had won. They have they would head to the championship game for the first time in 55 years. I wish Dad was here to watch the games. He would be so elated. I thought the same after our alma mater made it to the Final Four, but I tried not to pay much attention to it. Now I found myself seasoning my already perfectly cooked branzino with salty tears after rereading my sister's text. Although my dad was a Howard alum, he was born and raised in the Hoosier State, just a kid from Indiana. Because of his love of his hometown, Richmond, and the proximity but enough distance from home, my sister and I would choose Purdue University as our white flag for not attending the real HU. If I let the thought linger about my dad not being around for March Madness, I would also have to revisit the memories of him driving down I 65 to pick me up from Purdue every holiday and homesick weekend. I would have to reconcile the upcoming events he would also not be around for: his 44th wedding anniversary, my sister's birthday, a random Wednesday afternoon. Because of my dad's lingering absence, I would skip creating a bracket for this year's NCAA basketball tournament. Upon grief choosing you, anniversaries, celebrations, and the mundane are traded for memorials, remembrance, and a silent echo. I've experienced dancing turning into mourning, and my soul begs the question if mourning will ever accept this dance. Years before being accepted to Purdue, I quietly came downstairs while my dad made coffee for him and my mom. I was at least an hour earlier than my usual wake up time. It was an unspoken rule that mornings were reserved for my parents. My mom has expressed that this time of day, the beginning of twilight before the sun rises, is when she misses my dad the most. Since she named that sentiment, my siblings and I have taken turns waking up at dawn to sit with her, sharing memories as she takes slow sips of coffee from my dad's Howard alum coffee mug, homage to the Mecca where the two locked eyes in Lock Hall. But on this particular morning, before the coffee was brewed, 7-year-old me had an important question. Perhaps it had come to me in a dream. Dad, what happens when you die? Puzzled by the randomness of my question, but also a Gemini, so was impressed by my curiosity, responded, you go to heaven. Forever? Yes, eternity. So you don't come back ever. I was confused. Well, will God allow you to come back to earth to be with your family at least? I added desperately. I hope so. My dad responded somberly as if my question had uncovered a fear of his. It was certainly a fear of mine. I wonder if God took this early morning exchange and similar ones that came after as a prayer for us to never be apart. Although my dad has died, he has not left me, and grieving has now become the price and the purity of love. What they don't tell you about grief is that it turns almost every moment into a shot clock. When you know your parent is dying, the countdown is a plea. Lord, please let my dad make it through the night. Or begging doctors to explain in detail one more time why there isn't anything that they can do. After 3 weeks of cheerful greetings at the hospital, another day, Dad, you got this, and being filled with immense gratitude that my dad had made it through the night. On April 30th, 2023, I witnessed my dad take his final breath. Immediately, grief took residence in my heart as I laid my head on his chest and whispered, Dad. My life has recalibrated to everything prior to and after this moment. The timer on grief has since evolved. How many more seconds before I'm reminded? I cried bringing in the new year in London after pulling a card at game night that asked, what is your definition of a good father? I wept my last night in Mexico City when the license plate of my Uber read Dad, followed by the year that me and my brother were born. I sniffled amongst the tulips in Amsterdam after realizing that there is no gift in the world that I can give my dad earthside. I can only attempt to make my grief lighter by accepting this new expectation of what it means to love despite great loss. Grief forces you to remember, to reconcile, to bargain, to hold, to release, to expand, to change, to heal, to fly, to ground, to accept, to challenge. It has been a little over a year, 525,600 minutes, 544,420 minutes to be exact, since I witnessed my dad take his last breath and transition to the realm unseen. I did not measure the year in daylight, sunsets, or cups of coffee, but I did measure it in deep breaths, grasping for air, tears at the function, and the full awareness that I will grieve because I have loved and been loved unconditionally. Thank you.
Kristin, thank you so much for joining us today for the After the Release Craft interview. Your story was absolutely stunning, and you looked stunning that evening. And we know that, gosh, you honored your father in such a beautiful way for Release 3. So we have some burning questions about your process that we're going to get into today, and also some individual questions that we think a lot of our listeners will love to know. Little pieces of advice and tidbits about who you are and how you come to write such a gorgeous story. So, Glenn,
Yeah.
take
Let's
it
jump
away.
right in, Kristin. We're curious how you identify. Do you call yourself an artist, a writer, a storyteller, and why?
Great question. I say that I'm a writer because I write. So I've been writing since I can remember. And so I think for me, I've always been a writer, but I'm just now recently coming into sharing. So that's how I'm a writer because I write.
Yeah. And has it been hard for you to ever claim that? I noticed that you said you just are coming into sharing the work. Do you think that the sharing is like integral to it, or have you just been able to own that title of writer just because, as you said, you write?
Yeah, I think so. I also should say I have been a writing teacher, and so that's always been really easy for me to claim. Like I teach
Mm-hmm.
other people how to express themselves through writing, but I think honestly, it has been like when I went to the first craft and release show. Um, it was like the release part was like claim the most important and integral part. So when I was younger, I wrote all the time. I only shared it with my parents. And I was always too shy to share it with anyone else. Or I would hear someone else's first and be like, oh, why didn't I think of that? And so the sharing part is very new. And I really do give credit to you all for like, seeing something in me and like really pushing me to like share because that is part of the practice of being a writer.
It very much so is, and I think that that's not going to be the last time you release work at all.
Never.
But it leads into the question of what has your relationship been with sharing. I know you got into it with saying like, oh, I was shy and I just shared it with my parents. What
Mhm.
has been, I guess, the evolution of sharing your work, of releasing your work, because you it's in you, right? And we
Yeah.
know that when it comes out, this doesn't feel like the first time at all.
Right.
So
Mm.
And you have your
yes, what has
Substack,
it looked
we
like?
know. So I'm
Mhm.
sure there's
Yes.
been different forms that you've shared your work over the years, right?
Yeah, so I do come from like the Zanga days. So I used to write on Zanga back in the day, and it was like only my closest friends like had the link to my Zanga. I do remember that, and I think the evolution has been really the evolution of me. Like I think when my dad passed, it was someone told me something when my dad passed. It was one of my friends, they had never met my dad. And they were like, Kristin, I knew like about your dad and who he was just within the first like 5 minutes of meeting you. Like you had mentioned him. And I was like, oh wow. Like, and so I think for me, losing someone so close to me, I'm like, well, people don't talk about grief, people don't talk about loss, but like my dad feels so apart and connected to me. So like, how do I share who he was and who he is to me now, with people who may feel like uncomfortable with, discussing grief or loss or even love. And so I think for me, it started with the Substack, because it was the Substack because I watched the Little Mermaid live edition, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I could not just like keep that in. So I went to Substack, and I've mostly been sharing about my grief and like the process on Substack. But I think it just became a thing of like, I want to share this part of me that is not always easy to share. So I have to do it through writing and then sharing that writing.
And your voice, I think both the written voice, but also the orator, right? The
Mm-hmm.
oral voice that you use is very distinct. How do you define, and did you define both? I'm curious because there's a rawness that we heard in hearing your voice, but also not just the story, but like this, you can tell it's written, well written, but
I feel like there's a
there's
magic.
just an authenticity. Yes, a magic, an authenticity, something that you can feel. There's a texture
Yeah, there's
there.
texture.
Texture. How did you come to define both your written voice and your speaking voice?
That is an awesome question. I think so the piece that I wrote for Release 3 was like a series of journal entries. And so I think like there's like, when you see tears on the page. So there is like tears on the page, from not even me writing that, but just moments that I pieced together of like writing. And so I think really the the writing just comes from just a state of being vulnerable, because I write every day, and obviously everything is not shared, but the things that are shared is from like a very vulnerable place. And then actually speaking, I think because in my piece I do, and I actually started to write about this too, of just like the age of my grief. Like it's um it's like a toddler right now. Like it's 1 years old. My dad has been off of the earth for a year. So I think I wanted to like kind of go back to like my childhood self. Um and something that has been like really prominent to me lately is just like this idea of like when I'm grieving, like giving myself grace and love for like the version of me, even, a month after my dad passed or 6 months after my dad passed, because I'm still like learning the tools to like navigate this new life. And so I always want to like be so delicate with who that person is and like all that she has gone through outside of just grieving her dad. And so I think the voice just comes from like me wanting to be just very gentle with that version of myself.
Yeah, I hear that. The gentleness, the love, all of that is in there. What is the function of honesty in your work?
Mm. I think earlier you all asked like, how do I identify like a writer, storyteller? And so I think storytelling just has to be honest. And I think I honestly was not expecting people to connect so much with the piece, because I was just like, I think after, we'll probably get into this later, but after I had pieced it together and submitted it, I was just like, woo, like Glad that's over. But I think because I was honest, like people were able to connect so much more with it. And I feel like like when you're writing, it's so intuitive. And so you have to be honest. Like even if you're writing fiction, it's like still something honest about whatever you're feeling. You have to be honest with yourself first, in order for people to really connect and relate to it. Otherwise, you're just putting out dishonest work. And I just don't believe in that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think like taking your time and like going deep within yourself, like just requires like a level of honesty and vulnerability with yourself. And I think you all did a writing workshop. I forget what it was called,
Mining
but I
memory.
remember,
Mining memory.
yes, mining
Mm-hmm.
memory. Oh my gosh, so good. But I remember you all did that. And I think like people who participated were just so honest about just the memories that they had. And so I remember like saying at that workshop, like the veil is thin because it's just like you think that you understand things or how they came to be, and it seems like it wouldn't be so obvious, but it is. And so I think because the veil is thin, like as writers, artists, storytellers, we just, do our notch to unveil the veil.
Very much so. And I think that I love what you said about, to be a story, like storytelling is truth telling. And
Mhm.
the most impactful stories that I think all three of us can even point to that have impacted our work have been the most almost uncomfortably honest
Yeah.
things. So that leads me to ask, what do you think is the anatomy of a good story on top of truth telling? What are some of the elements that you feel like you're like, okay, because when you're like, oh, I pieced this together, and I'm like, all right, that's good. You still had you still had to piece and take parts of yourself and put it
Mm-hmm.
on the page. So
Yeah.
very curious as to what you added on top of the truth.
There's this quote, ugh, I forget who said it, but basically they say, like in an artist practice, it's like as you're working, like your naysayers leave the room, your haters leave the room, and if you're lucky enough, you leave the room. And so I have to get the exact quote. I've written it down before, but I think for me, the elements of a good story is like truth telling. Yes, we talked about that, but I also think like just like going. I think for me, when I was like, okay, I'm done, I was like, okay, I can go like a little deeper. Like I can be more vulnerable, which is something that I'm still working on anyway. And so I think just like going deep within your well. And so it did require me to like for me to leave the room, because then it just became a thing of like I knew I wanted to submit something, and so I was just like, I don't even like, I know that there will be space for this somewhere, I don't know where. And so I think it just required me to be just go really deep within myself to figure out how I wanted the story to be told, be vulnerable in that.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
and
an observation I
yeah, go
have
ahead.
about your work and within that piece specifically, you give us these very clear snapshots of moments
Mhm.
with your father and even with your mother and other people in your family, and those, for
Mhm.
me, hearing the story, like they stick they stuck with me. They stuck in my chest, right? Like I remember specifically the Howard mug. Like you give us these
Absolutely.
visuals, these little tidbits that, yeah, that just resonate with people. And I would say that that is an element of great storytelling and an element that made your story so visceral. Are these just very descriptive, very intimate scenes
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
that were just
Yes.
packed with emotion and tenderness?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
It,
I think even my dad is a storyteller, and I think even he would tell me these stories from when he was like 12 years old. And I'm like, Dad, how do you even remember that? But he remembered the details. And so I think I'm so grateful for that memory that I received, that I remembered, that it came to me about like me going downstairs, because that was like the first time I ever asked my dad about death. And so I think I'm just grateful that it came to me, and I wonder, like, I can't ask my dad anymore, but well, I can't ask him, but um just I wonder if in his practice of storytelling, if he would just like random memories would come to him and he would just want to share, because they were like very just vivid and colorful. So I appreciate you sharing that, Glenn.
Yeah. And on to our final question in our signature craft questions. You alluded to this a
perception.
little bit earlier about, you said that you write every day. What else does your practice look like?
mm, um well, I definitely write with fire, so I always light a candle, and sometimes I'll read something like a poem to just find some inspiration. And I like to write, like lately, I've just been writing on my yoga mat, like after a flow. That's been really helpful. Um, I was in a practice of like starting my day and ending my day with writing. And I'm just like, if I miss a day, it's fine. I think the particular journal that I have right now, I'm just like, I want to be done with this big journal and carrying it around everywhere. So I'm just like committing to writing every day so I can just fill the pages up. But it's a very slow process. Like I think even when I was like, I knew that the submission day was, May 12th, and but I didn't like sit and write about what I thought I was going to write about every day. It was just like, I would just ask, like, God, please, like, give me a dream or something to like write about, like, help me find inspiration in the world. And it doesn't always happen. So I just make sure that I write something. Um, but because I would say that it probably, like me writing that piece, it probably took like a good like 2 weeks, like just because I was marinating on it first before I even wrote anything down. Like I was just like, okay, I know that it's coming. Like, what do I want to write about? Just thinking about some things, like, and then I went to rough draft and was like, okay, you have to get words on the paper now. So like, what has been coming up for you? And so I was flipping back and I was like, based on what I've written, I can write about self love, I can write about grief. Obviously, it ended up being grief, but I think it's just a very slow process.
And
Music is really a part of a big part of my practice. Like, I sent the piece to my therapist, and she was like, "I was wondering if you were thinking about Measure a Year, like the song." I was like,
Ooh,
"Yeah, I was." And so
wow.
there's just like music is like was is just such a big part of my life, and my relationship with my dad and my family loves music. And so I'm definitely always listening to something before, and then I turn it off and try to write. So there's a lot of elements, but I think the biggest one is just like slowness. Like even I feel like even when I'm not writing, I'm writing, you know.
Mm.
Just, I'm
Yeah, for
thinking
sure.
about it.
You're
Yeah.
collecting, you're gathering, you're processing. But it
Hmm.
also sounds like consistency is really important for you.
Yes,
Like to get into a habit of writing
Absolutely.
daily is very difficult. Is
it's
that
very
just
difficult.
like a just a promise you made to yourself, or it's something that you just like you
Yeah, I
need to do, or
started
maybe a bit of
the
both?
artist way. The artist way. So my three pages a day. And then once I had finished that, I was just like, well, I want a prompt today. Like I want, something. And sometimes the writing is just like, these are the things that were so amazing about today that I want to remember. But I think, yeah, the consistency for me, it just offers like an element of like self-reflection, accountability. It's just like a meeting with myself that I feel like I owe myself. Um, so I think it is in a way a promise to myself of just like my promise to like remember. And it's also like remember, celebrate, cry, all the things. But I also just, I just love writing. So I think I'm glad that like God has given me like this is the hobby. Like, you know. So
Yeah.
And Kristen, you were writing like physically. Is physicality a big thing with your writing? So it's like paper, pen first, and then you type it up? Because, yep, I was gonna say I saw you at Rough Draft, and you're like, you got your head down, and you're like, you're really physically writing this stuff down.
yeah,
So
and
I think
honestly,
there's a
I
magic
think
in that.
like as a millennial, getting distracted. So if I started on, there is one story that I started on the computer that is still in draft form because I'm like, oh, like I want to like, buy some lip gloss or, like I just get into this, portion of like, I'm just on the internet and it's available to me. So I definitely like I write first. And like color is important to me too. So like I think I was around the time that like the submission was due, my dad's favorite color is blue. So I wanted like all of my entries for that week to be in blue. So like
Mm.
there is like, a little methodical with how I like choose colors. Sometimes I do like stickers. Um but I like to write physically. And then I also love research. So, like, if I'm like wanting to understand, like, why I have a craving or why like something exists, then that's when I'm getting ready to type it out, I'll like go on JSTOR and like look up some things. But I think just I love the like pen to paper, like it just really offers me a lot of solace. And I love like writing letters to people. So I think just anything pen to paper is like really
Hmm.
good for my soul until I have to transfer it to typing.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. We're going to switch gears into our burning specific questions that are related to the piece, the beautiful piece that you submitted. I'll
Yes.
Mhm.
jump in first, Kristen. You mentioned that when you were trying to zero in on what you might write about, you thought about self love, you thought about grief, like you kind of mulled over different topics and you settled on grief. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit more about how you view the relationship between grief and love, because
Mhm.
that piece was just so full of love.
Oh, thank you. So I think when I like Glid, you and I had a conversation. I think at like a previous rough draft, and you're like, "You're gonna be up there," and I'm like, and I'm thinking in my head like, it has to be a good topic, like it has to be something that I can write to. So then when it was love, I immediately was like, "Oh, I already know," like I'm gonna write about my dad. And so it was just, I think, a lot of people have heard this saying, um, grief is love with nowhere to go. And I read, there's a book, Bigger Than Bravery, that says like grief is the thickest form of love. So I just knew that I, that the two are like one and the same. Like there's a book I think that's called like Love is Grief or Grief is Love. And so my relationship with grief has been like, well, I might have forgotten the question. What's the relationship?
The relationship between love and grief, but you can continue where you were going though.
Yeah,
The
so
relationship
I
with grief.
think I just am like when I hear like grief is love with no place to go, but I'm like I think it goes somewhere, like I think it is like we're so connected, I think my dad and I. So I know that like when I'm grieving, like the love is I do feel like lighter when I am able to have a cry or release or write something to him. And so I think like it's just all connected. Like I want one of the avenues I was also thinking about going is like writing a love letter to grief. Um, because I think now that I've experienced it so heavily, like I'm not afraid of it because I'm like, I know that I can love, that I'm lovable. And so because of that, like grief is just, it just comes with it. I just don't think we ever like anticipate having to like navigate that. But I was looking back at one of my other pieces and I was like, I was saying how like grief is like molding me and it's growing me. It's like forcing me to expand. And so when I thought about that, I was like, well, when I reread it, I was like, well, that's love. Like even while my dad was here, he was like showing me those things. Like my mom shows me those things. My siblings, through their love, they like force me to do these things. And I think like grief is just like, are you gonna do it anyway? Like even though that person or that relationship is not here anymore, that job is not here anymore, are you still gonna do it for yourself or do it for love? So all
It's
connected.
such a powerful, powerful sentiment, Kristen,
Yeah.
and an insanely powerful thing to say. Of like, you're not scared of grief. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that, and
Mm.
that's something that I'm going to keep with me, and I think a lot of listeners will hold on to very tightly. Um, and that's my question is for me, but also for listeners. Of what advice would you give to those who have a strong desire to write about grief, but don't know where to start? Because, like you said, yours is just a toddler. It's like a lot of people would not be able to piece together something so beautiful and also packed, like Glenn said, so something so full
Mm.
in within that time frame. They can't really boil down that love into a piece to discuss grief. So any advice you would give would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think start small. Like I started my piece is really like drafts of like at least four pieces, like because I was just like I don't know like where I want to go with this story. And so I kept starting over and starting over, and it just ended up, I ended up piecing it together as such. But I think start small. On the day that my dad had passed, I didn't want to write that day, so I chose another medium, but all I wrote was like, my dad died today. Like I just got it on the paper, and I think just to put something, and then even if you have to come back to it later, but just start so small, like a sentence. Because I think what the sentence like kind of forces you to do. Like eventually, like somewhere in your day, you will have to expand on it, you know, like, well, what does it mean that your dad died today? Like, how do you feel about the fact that your dad died today? And maybe you don't write about it, but you think about it. And so I think definitely start small. Because I will say, even though like grief is, I'm not scared of grief, it is like, I do see when I first like was like grieving my dad, I was like, oh, like this can get very dangerous, you know? Like you definitely have to pace yourself, I would say, for sure. Because it is dark, you know? And so I would say just start small, because like even starting small is like starting big. And when you're writing about something like grief, like the fact that you're even mentioning it, you know, sharing it with anyone, or um, expressing yourself in that way. So I would say small but mighty.
That's great advice. Thank you, Kristin.
Fantastic
Of
advice.
course.
We're going to move to our final question, which is our wild card. We have this selection of conversation cards under our All Too Human series. So we have
Mhm.
a list of 87 questions related to the topic of love. So you can pick a question between 1 and 87. Pick a number between 1 and 87.
Oh, well, the first question that, or the first number that I thought of was 82. So,
Ooh,
82.
nice and high.
Ah, okay. This one is related to romantic love. So, how do you
mhm.
handle disagreements with your partner?
Ooh, I'll have to send this to my therapist. How do I handle disagreements? I think, and I'm still working on this, listening, and listening to understand and not to respond. Listening, I think, getting curious. I think it's so important, like in any, whether you're disagreeing, agreeing, just to like get curious about the person that you're with. And so if you disagree on something, like really under, like following the rabbit hole and getting curious of like, well, why? Because I think that might lead to a bigger conversation about, you know, how you were raised or what you've been through in the past. So I would say getting curious and listening is how I
I love
handle,
that.
try to handle
Getting
disagreements.
curious.
Getting curious. Ooh, put that on a pillow for real, because it just it is, there is no curiosity in disagreement sometimes. So I think I think that is something that's virtuous, Kristin. So we so greatly appreciate it. I've taken so much from this interview. I know Glenn
Mhm.
has as well. I
Thank
think your
y'all.
story, the ripple effect of your story will be beyond, I think, anything that we could possibly imagine. Even hearing it, I think we don't like to talk about these things because we know that they're eventually going to come.
Mhm.
So
Hmm.
stories like yours are just such beautiful preparation for everything, that's something that's going to meet us eventually in this life. So
Yeah.
thank you for bearing your heart, for bearing a piece of yourself, and introducing us to your father along the way.
Of course.
Yes.
Thank you both. I love y'all. So
We love
I'm
We love you
you.
too.
excited.
You're stuck with us. So
I
you're
know.
stuck. You're stuck with us. You're stuck with us. And thank you again, Kristin. We can't
Of
wait for everyone
course.
to hear the story.
Yay. Thank y'all.